Hi guys, I'm going to talk about part 2 of Ransom. So get your notebooks out, get ready to take notes. Let's do it. So just a bit on Priam's background. This whole chapter here revolves around Priam and his actions. So part 1 there we've got Achilles and what he's doing on the same day as Priam. And they both start out in the morning and you'll see they mirror each other. So they've got chapter 1 and then chapter 2, Achilles and then Priam. Malouf is trying to mirror these characters off, one another, and they often have the same things. They do the same things, or they think the same way. They talk about leadership and they talk about relationship to their people and relationship to their loved ones. So you'll see that. We'll explore that a bit more in a minute. But just some background on Priam first. He's the king of Troy. His wife is Hecuba. He's an old man at this stage, so one of the reasons why he's not fighting is he's old, but also as the king he's a figurehead rather than a practical figure as a general. He ends up dying in the Trojan War. He's killed by Achilles' son. He is the father of many, so he has many wives and then many more women that he has children with. So some of his children are that labeled there: Hector, Paris, Cassandra, Helenus, etc. So the whole of Ransom, the whole novel revolves around Priam. It's the story of Priam's grief as a father, and he wants Hector's body back, and he goes to plead for Hector's body back, and he offers gold. So that's where the name Ransom comes from, is Priam wanting his son's body back and offering a lot of money for that, a lot of gold and whatnot. So in this chapter we see that Priam is getting ready to be escorted by Somax to Achilles' tent. Along the way, Hermes joins him. He's the god of travelers. As I was saying before, Priam is killed by Achilles' son on the altar of Zeus after the events of Ransom, though. So just going over the plot points in a nutshell, it's quite a long chapter, and sometimes it's hard to tell with all the monologues. There's quite a lot of monologuing where Priam just talks about his childhood, which mirrors Achilles, reflecting on his childhood as well. And then he goes off and talks to his family, which also mirrors Achilles' discussion with Patroclus. So at the start, we've got Priam sleepless after 11 days. He wakes in the night. He's got this dream-like visitation of Iris, and she talks of chance. And that's this tension between agency and fate coming into it. So a god has appeared to him talking about chance, and perhaps Priam can actually do something about his fate, or do something which will alter his fate. So Priam sees this vision after Iris. The Iris scene is really kind of a blink and you miss it. It's a few short paragraphs, and then Priam sees this vision of himself in disguise in a cart of gold. So he takes this as a vision from the gods. Priam visits his wife Hecuba to convince her of his plan, and it's quite tense between these two. Hecuba explains her frustration that she's unable to do anything as a woman, so she is grieving as well. Priam is talking about what he can do. Maybe he can go and do something, and Hecuba reflects that as a woman, her place is not to do anything. And Priam really resonates with that as well, as the figurehead, as the king. His place is not to do or to fight, it's to be the king. Priam's monologue, it's a monologue kind of reflection, and he's reflecting on his childhood, and he's explaining to Hecuba, and he's explaining things that he says he's never told to anyone. So there's these horrible times when he's a child, and Troy is being attacked. Okay, so he's telling the story of his childhood, and as a child he's called Podarces. I think that's how you pronounce it. and he's running away from Troy, and he's trying to disguise himself as one of the common kids, and he kind of rubs dirt and dung on himself and tries to smell bad. He sees the other royal kids, or the aristocracy, the kids in the wealthy kids in the group of kids running out of Troy while it's being attacked, and he tries to hide from them, so that he won't get called out. And there's this such fear about it. He fears for his life. And he describes the life he could have led as a common man. So this kind of sliding doors, I don't know whether you've heard of a sliding doors moment, where he's got choices about what he's going to do, and he goes on to become a king, but he could have actually led a life as a satisfying life as a common man. In his vision there, he's reflecting on seeing his sister, and then his sister calls him Podarces, and then Heracles is at her side. So there's this horrible kind of vision that Priam is describing, where Heracles kind of grabs his head and is threatening him, and he offers to save Podarces because of Priam's sister and what she said. So he is saved, like he is ransomed, in that way. So we've got these different ransoms that happen. The major one is obviously Hector's body that Priam is going to get, but ransom is mentioned a number of times in this chapter for different reasons. So he's haunted by Heracles standing over him. Heracles renames him Priam, which means bought or paid for. So and he actually taunts him, he mocks him. This is an opportunity for Heracles to mock Priam, saying that whenever you hear your name, you'll remember me. You remember this moment, which is really quite a horrible thing. So Priam describes his plan, the vision that he saw, and then Hecuba says, come on, let's go and talk to your family and see what they say. And they try to persuade him not to do that. And they have different views on what it means to be king, and they have different understandings of Priam himself as a person. But in each case, they describe his position as king, and then therefore what he should be doing. And Priam is trying to kind of rail against that. He's saying, well, I've got my position, but I need to act as a person here. And so that's why he was reflecting on his childhood. That was when he was actually just a person, a man or human, rather than his position of king. So Priam still decides. He says, thank you very much for your tributes and your kind words and your encouragement and whatnot, but I'm still going to go through with this plan. So in that way, he's acting as the king, isn't he? Because he's deciding to do what everyone else doesn't want him to do, but because he's the king, he can do it. And the king is deciding to become a common person. So there's that tension, he's calling the shots, but he's calling the shots in order to become a common person. He has a mule and cart brought to the palace. There's actually 2 mules. Priam thinks Somax looks like the driver in his dream, so that he takes it as a confirmation that the gods have endorsed it, or they're backing him on this. He's doing the right thing. He knows it's right because it looks like my dream. So Hecuba, just before they leave, Hecuba prays over them. Helenus sees a chicken hawk and names it as an eagle. Somax actually sees this chicken hawk first, and he names it as a chicken hawk. And then, and Helenus is the priest, the high priest. So, he's kind of encouraged to hey, look, there's a symbol, that's a sign. If you call it an eagle, then that's a sign of the gods. It's a good omen. And the eagle is Zeus's symbol and messenger. So if we call it an eagle, then that's a symbol that Zeus has backed this. Zeus is on our side. But then Somax is like, hang on, it's a chicken hawk. You're just naming that chicken hawk an eagle in order for that to be a sign for you. So that's kind of manipulating, that the god's message maybe, and seeing messages where they aren't. All of Troy stops to watch Priam and Somax and his cart leave. So there's this description at the end of that chapter where life has gone on normally, and people have built houses and repaired houses, and it's been going on for 9 years, this war. So life has carried on, even despite restrictions and the war. But this moment where Priam comes down in a cart, and everyone knows it's the king, but they're unsure. It's a really uneasy moment because he's the king, but he's not wearing kingly robes, and they know it's him, but they feel awkward about it, and they're really unsure. And so they leave Troy. They get out of the gates. Just some symbols, guys, I wanted to chat through here. I really want you to be able to talk about symbolism in Ransom, and then compare that to the Queen. So we've got Priam's cart and Achilles' chariot, and we've also got the Queen's Land Rover Defender. So, and they make a big deal of, Priam, the director of the Queen, makes a big deal of the Queen's Land Rover, and he has Charles and Queen Elizabeth have a conversation about it, and Charles said, you know, why don't you get a new one? And the Queen responds by saying, no, this is working just fine. So it's kind of symbolic of Charles wanting to modernize and get something new, and the Queen being happy with what she's got, which has worked completely well, and it's satisfactory and it's fine, which symbolizes her traditional attitude. It's working fine. It's always worked for me before. Priam's cart and Achilles' chariot, so they're both dragging things behind them. Achilles is dragging Hector's body behind them every day in rage and vengeance, and he's actually really tortured by it because he's doing it to heal himself, this cathartic exercise of trying to heal his rage and grief. Priam, on the other hand, has a cart behind him, or he's sitting on the cart, and he's got all the gold there, which is what his son's body is worth. He's taking with him all the gold which he says his son's body is worth. So in that way, we've got these vehicles, you know, these parallel vehicles across from the film to the novel. Naming is an interesting thing across the first two parts here. We've got in Priam's part, Podarces is renamed Priam, but we've also got Somax, and Priam renames him Idaeus, and which means King's Herald. And Priam has this little inner monologue about, I don't know whether Idaeus is really called Idaeus. I don't know whether he's been the same guy for my whole life, but I call him Idaeus. He's my herald, and he goes before me all the time. And this new guy, Somax, well, I'm going to call you Idaeus. So there's this renaming that happens. And for Priam, it's mocking him to call him Priam. Heracles mocks him by doing that. Somax doesn't like it. He doesn't really like this new name. He says, no, I'm Somax. Like I am myself. I know myself. So he doesn't like that renaming. Patroclus, wearing Achilles' armor, is named Achilles. So deceitfully, Patroclus wears the armor to try and trick people, to try and trick the Greeks into, and the Trojans, that Achilles has entered the battle again, which would be very empowering to see your hero run onto the battlefield again. So there's this renaming that happens. The chicken hawk thing is an interesting thing. We've got the eagle being a symbol of Zeus, and he's named as Jove on one of the pages. So you might have noticed that little Jove. Well, that means Zeus. It's taken to be an omen, and I think this is where we've got this idea of, well, there's a chicken hawk, but I'm going to call it an eagle, which is about human agency. The humans have chosen to view it that way. They've chosen to name it an eagle, and therefore chosen to view it as a positive thing, which is opposed to the idea of fate and that the gods have meddled. So there's tension in there. Clothing here is quite symbolic of Priam becoming a common man again. If he's wearing his kingly robes and all his wealth, then he's not a plain common man anymore. He needs to wear plain clothes to be a common man. I just want to draw some parallels here between the two. The next slide we've got the Queen side by side with all of this, but just have a look at how Achilles and Priam are set up to parallel each other, or you could call this mirroring. So Malouf is mirroring these two characters. One of the things you could talk about in an essay is the fact that these two chapters are put side by side. There's other pieces of information here which shows you that there's this mirroring. So Achilles begins the chapter in the morning on the shoreline. He can't sleep. He's haunted by grief and rage, and he reflects on his childhood. Similarly, Priam begins this chapter in the morning. He can't sleep. He's haunted by grief, and he also reflects on his childhood. So we've also got this tension between natures. We've got this divine nature and the human nature within Achilles. There's this earthly element and a water element happening as well. The tension between natures here, you'll have to write this in yourself, I just forgot to put it down, is Priam's kingly nature and then his human nature. So to be human is to grieve and to be a father and to perform kind of more human roles, whereas a king is a symbol and there are rules about that. So there's this tension between king and man, or king and human. Next down we've got the renaming. We've got this renaming happening, Patroclus and Achilles, and then Somax renamed Idaeus. Achilles feels insulted by Agamemnon, so we've got this insult paralleling each other. Somax feels insulted by being renamed. So it's interesting how that parallel doesn't sit with Priam in his chapter. It's Somax is renamed and Somax is insulted, whereas Achilles is or Patroclus is renamed, but Achilles is the one who feels insulted. We've got a cart and a chariot. They both have two animals, so two horses and then two mules. See that beauty and shock pull the cart for Somax. This chariot drags Hector's body behind, and then the cart drags Hector's ransom behind. Okay, I've just included a quote there to substantiate that. It's not just me drawing parallels out of nothing. Malouf actually goes to great lengths and he describes in a certain way. He describes the ransom or the gold as a body of their dear kinsman Hector. So it looks like a body in the back of the cart. All this gold in there. Right at the bottom there, we've got the Myrmidons unsure of how to react to Achilles' behaviour because he's behaving against their kind of cultural norms and everything that they've been taught. You know, how to respect someone in a battle, how to respect their body. The Myrmidons are unsure of how to react to that, and we've got the Trojans unsure of what to think or whether to cheer at Priam, dressed simply and leaving in a cart. I've just put this side by side with the Queen there. I don't think it's perfect, but you see the first two columns were what we just read out, but we can draw some comparisons across, some parallels to the Queen. It begins with the Queen having her portrait done and Tony Blair in the election. So it's not early in the morning like Achilles or Priam's parts. So that's a distinction there. But the parallel there is that the beginning of the film, Tony Blair is directly compared with the Queen. The Queen is having a portrait done, which is a very royal thing to do. That's what they do all the time. Well, maybe once in a while. But Tony Blair has just won the election. So they're contrasting the two leaders at the very start of the Queen, and Malouf in the first two parts compares his two leaders on opposite sides. We've got a tension between natures as well. The Queen struggles with her queenly duty and the protocol. She often references the word protocol, and that means just the rules. And she's got this human nature as well. She's wrestling with human nature, and should she behave like a person, which is to be emotive, or emotional, sorry, and to kind of grieve in public, which is what her public wanted her to do. They wanted it to be seen as a human being as well as the Queen, which is not really a royal thing to do. So the renaming there, it's interesting at the start there, the Queen appoints the PM, that she makes a big deal of it. Blair goes down on one knee and he tries to ask, I will do this and I will be the Prime Minister and the Queen says, no, I ask the questions here. That's my role. I will appoint you Prime Minister and put him in that title. When Diana dies and the Queen is told about the funeral arrangements and whether it's going to be a public funeral, the Queen says she is not an HRH. She's not Her Royal Highness. Okay, so that's about her title. She's not one. She hasn't got the right name or title. This feeling of insult, she feels humiliated by Blair. That's towards the end where we get this. She kind of names it's humiliation, not humility. They're very different ideas. They've all got their vehicles there. The Land Rover discovered in 2002. You can Google that if you like. I didn't get one for dragging the body behind. I wondered about the stag symbol, but it's not really dragged behind at all, is it? So yeah, I didn't come up with anything for this dragging behind parallel. And at the bottom there, the reaction of the people. The English people demand that the Queen responds emotionally. So we've got that the public want the Queen to act a certain way. The Queen feels like she's got to do the queenly thing and not what the public want her to do, or the human thing. So that's similar across those characters there. Some important quotes, guys. What I want you to do now is, after each quote or a couple of quotes, I'd like you to describe what they mean. So I'm going to talk about what they symbolize and what they mean, but can you write them in a paragraph or even a short one sentence or two? I've put some vocab at the bottom there for you to use to stretch yourself. So pause it whenever you like, and then practice your writing, your articulation of these ideas. The gods do not always act openly. Gods had set up Priam, king of Troy, as a mockery, as they had all along intended. So the narrator is describing the gods' actions, and Priam feels that he's been put in as a king, which is a mockery. Priam thinks his son Helenus is too comfortable in the flesh. So Helenus is not behaving like a royal. He's become too comfortable in the flesh, which means as his human self. He behaves too much like a man, not a prince. So there's a few quotes in this about the king's role. So it's the idea of being obliged, to stand still at the center, both actual and symbolic. So that's the king's role, is to stand still in the center. He reflects on his wife's pleading with him. So Hecuba talks to him, but he says women's talk is not in his sphere. So he's acting very much in his sphere of what he knows and what is proper for him to do. What the people see, is what they are meant to see. He's a ceremonial figurehead. So that's an interesting turn of phrase there. That's how he views himself as king. What I do is what any man might do. So he says that what I do is what any man might do. So there's this tension between man and king. And his wife responds by saying, but you are not any man. And the any is italicized there. It's emphasized through italics. Priam has always been so observant of what is established and lawful, the proper course. So two quotes there about position there again. Iris visits and talks of chance, a world that is also subject to chance. So Iris is pushing that idea that it's not all about fate, and because the gods have said it doesn't mean that men can't change things or have an influence. That's called agency. Hecuba grieves that she is a woman and can do nothing but sit here and rage and weep. So that's that position of women, but also that's reflected in Priam. He can't do anything but rage and weep either, and that's what he's suggesting. He's going to go and do something. This is Hecuba's words again. And you expect this wolf, this violator of every law of God and men, to take the gift you hold out to him and act like a man? So she's describing Achilles and his behavior. Well, that's like an animal. He's going to behave like an animal, and you're expecting him to be reasonable. So she doubts that. Words are powerful. They too can be the agents of what is new. I thought that directly related to the Queen as well. Hecuba is sensitive to the slightest shades in him, which mirrors Achilles' change in colour when he's possessed by his grief and rage. Priam is saved as a child by becoming the common man, a slave, and he smells, he's got the slave smell, and that's the thing that could save him. Hecuba doesn't recognise Priam's voice, she says, in a voice she barely knows. So it mirrors the change in Achilles' demeanour, but also the Queen's voice and attitude of being out of touch with the public. So he changes his voice because he's reflecting on when he wasn't a king. He's not speaking as a king, he's speaking as a man. And that's a voice she barely knows. Heracles renames Podarces Priam, the price paid. So it means ransom. So that's that idea of ransom again, the price that you have to pay. Priam says, I was restored, being put in position as king. Here are a number of quotes, and they're all about doing what must be done. So for the king, this is what his role is. This is protocol, and this is how Malouf describes the king's protocol. The king, as you know, has to act in the full assurance of what the gods have called him to. I have always, to the public view, been just what I appear to be, that is the discipline of kings, but to achieve it I have had to be more rigid than others, a little too punctilious, I know, and all that is due to ceremony, a stickler, as they say, for form, for the rules. Which that kind of describes Queen Elizabeth to a T. She's been a stickler to the rules, and because she's safe in that, and she's trying to do what's right because the rules are what's right and what she should be doing. I'll skip ahead. The second last quote there. Only I know what it costs to be such an object. Priam says that about himself, but that is also the Queen Elizabeth. Only she knows the costs. Alright, let's skip ahead a little bit. I know you can read those yourself. I have had a good 60 years now to consider the splendour and limitations of what it is to be king. So again, discussion of who knows best what is the king's role. Well, Priam does. He's had 60 years of it, and he says that. You ask me to stand as I have always done at a kingly distance from the human, which in my kingly role, as you say, can have no part in. I can have no part in, but I am also a father. So he's also talking about that human role, that fatherly role, and the kingly role, and he's said that he has to bear it, which is bear his grief, to bear his grief as a king. Cassandra, I thought this was interesting. Cassandra has nothing to say. Cassandra is she has these the gift of foresight, and when she says things, people don't believe her. So it's this blessing and a curse. But she's got nothing to say about Priam's plans because her god has withdrawn. So the god's not around her anymore. She doesn't hear from him. Priam describes Polydamas's tribute as, you are too generous in your tribute. It is true that the gods made me a king. So he attributes his success to the gods, but now he's going to try and do something for himself as a human. One day war comes, and what that moment demands is strength and nerve and sinew, quickness of eye and foot and hand. He's talking about war and the battle. Alright, last page of quotes, guys. One of the chief concerns of a good king is the image he presents. Priam describes shamelessly stripped and humiliated, then dying when Troy is sacked, and then says, but I do not want that to be the one sad image of me that endures in the minds of men. So he's aware that he's probably going to die, and if he does die with the fall of Troy, then they will pull him into the street and kill him, and he'll be humiliated. but he doesn't want that to be his legacy or the legend of Priam. He's actually trying to alter that and give himself a different legend, a different story, and that is the one that we know of Priam going to get his son's body and begging Achilles for it. Who can go humbly as a father and as a man to his son's killer and ask in the gods' name and in their sight to be given back the body of his dead son? Let the honor of all men be trampled in the dust. Oh, I think it's lest the honor of all men be trampled in the dust. So actually here, he's actually talking about his actions here. If he doesn't do this, then actually he is doing a disservice to all men, because we will not have honor in the way we act and the way we honor our dead and the way we honor our family. So he wants to do this and go and get his son's body, lest the honor of all men be trampled in the dust. I thought this is quite telling here. It is the office and the name that matters, not the person. That's about being the king. It's not about the person of the king. It's about the office and the name. Perhaps he is wrong and no offense is intended. So Somax is reflecting on the name that he's been given, Idaeus. Somax does not like being named Idaeus, which mirrors the queen's lack of understanding at Blair's insistence. It is such an unaccustomed sight, so sober, so stripped of all the finery and show, that the crowd, for all its high spirits, does not know how to react. This is the very last page of this chapter, and it's where they're heading out. And all of Troy is watching on their king leave, and he's looking like a common person. And they think, is he running away? Is he trying to get out of here to leave us to die? Or is, what is the plan here? And they're not sure whether they should clap or not. Guys, a few comparisons here to the Queen. So this theme of family, I kind of coupled that with receiving advice. So there's family and also receiving advice, but I coupled them together. Explain your plan to them. Let us see what they have to say of it. Hecuba says that to Priam. Explain the plan to them. Priam's family are duplicitous, but at least outwardly respectful. So he knows that there's these little factions, these little groups in his family, and they some of them don't like each other, some of them actively fight against each other or gossip against each other, but at least outwardly respectful. So we've also got, in the Queen, we've got Charles undermining the Queen, and he calls Tony Blair and says, I'm a modern man too, I'm a modernizer. So he's trying to distance himself from the Queen's traditional attitude, and therefore trying to actually save his own crown when he becomes king, that people would look on him as a modernizer and not someone who's out of touch, as the Queen is seen to be. Advice. So Priam values the advice offered by his family and subjects. The Queen does not. She doesn't like to be badgered. She's off in Scotland in her home Balmoral, and she's looking after her grandsons, and they're doing some stalking and different things that they do up in Scotland, but she's being harassed, these phone calls from Blair all the time, and the Queen does not like it, and Prince Philip also has an issue with it, and he makes this comment about, now your tea is cold, because the Queen's been so put out that she had to take a phone call. Well, what a bother it is for the Prime Minister to call. So it's about advice and who takes it and who doesn't. Priam doesn't take it, but the Queen does. The Queen doesn't like it. Priam does like the advice, but he doesn't take it. So the position as king, so there's that leadership theme. Priam has always been so observant of what is established and lawful, mirrors the Queen's adherence to protocol. And then this quote as well, only I know what it costs to be such an object. So it's about, we can talk about a theme of showing grief, or the demand on the Queen is to show grief, and Priam feels restricted in that he can't do that because he's a symbol and a figurehead, and that mirrors the Queen, none of that concerns anyone but myself, and I've tried never to let it show. Priam says that. None, and this is about his childhood. So none of that, his childhood, concerns anyone but myself, and I've tried never to let it show. So he's actually tried not to show his grief at his childhood when Troy was sacked for the first time, and he almost died, and he had this horrible, horrible experience. He's never told anyone, not even his family. And then let nothing peep out of the real man inside. So none of that grief, none of that emotion show or peep out of the real man. He's not allowed to show this real man who's in him. He's got to be the king. I thought it was interesting, just looking at character parallels. Okay, so looking at, what is one's experience in one novel and what's the other, is there a character equivalent in the film? So just reflecting on this quote by Somax, he says, he goes to the tavern to escape in lightheadedness the harshness of his life. And I thought, that kind of encapsulates what Diana is experiencing with the royal family. She leaves the royal family, she's not wanted there, but the press want her. The press want pictures of her, especially pictures of her doing things. Who's she hanging out with? Where's she going? And she hangs out with Dodi Fayed. But this quote encapsulates her running away and being in the public eye, and she's trying to escape in lightheadedness. Like there's pictures of her out on a boat, and she's trying to just enjoy some time with a friend. But the press won't leave her alone. The paparazzi won't leave her alone, which ends up killing her. So last thing, there's this quote in here. Somax says he does not know, the narrator says of Somax, he does not know how he should address the king, because the king isn't dressed as a king. This mirrors Blair's lack of understanding of protocol as he tries to ask the Queen to accept him as Prime Minister at the very start, but she says, no, I ask the questions here. So it's that position there, and Somax isn't sure how he should relate to the king, where Blair is not sure how he should relate to the Queen, and he's told, I think it's the butler, as they're walking up the stairs, you should never turn your back on her presence or Her Majesty. You should wait for her to put a hand up before you shake it. Nod your head to bow. So very particular things he has to do.